right, well, thank you everyone for being here. This is our annual Historic Preservation Commission retreat. On a time note, we are scheduled from 1 to 4. I would say we won't turn into a pumpkin at 4, but Longmont Public Media's battery will die at 4. So in effect, we will turn into a pumpkin. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chairman Lane.
Great, thanks. All right.
And I do have the agenda kind of on a presentation as well.
Okay, great. I've got it here.
We don't have necessarily enough copies of everything because as my preparation, I failed to print.
Melanie, do you want one?
Oh, that's okay. I can look.
All right, we'll call this to order and call the roll.
Commissioner Sibley.
Here.
Mayor Peck.
Here.
Commissioner O'Day.
Here.
Commissioner Jacoby.
Here.
Chairman Lane.
Here.
Commissioner Barnhart.
Here.
Commissioner Norton.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Let's see, do we need any introductions?
I have it there, Mary Frances.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, maybe we just go quickly around the room, around the table, and just maybe the briefest of why you're here.
Jennifer Hewitt-Apperson, Principal Planner. I'm the Historic Preservation Staff Liaison. So I am the troublemaker who sends emails along with our reporting secretary, Maria Yost. And with us today also, we have Melanie Neske, who's Associate Planner in our office, and I am bringing her to do more things in historic preservation as well.
Help the troublemaker.
Yes. So you might have seen her at the History Colorado conference. This year she went instead of me, so she would get immersed.
It was very exciting. I have a newfound love for neon signs, apparently.
I was like very excited.
Very cool. But happy to be here, yeah. I've served on a couple of planning commissions. I'm finishing up on the Art and Public Places Commission, so thank you all so much for the work that you do, and I'm excited to help you all out.
Are we going this way?
Yeah.
I'm Holly Norton. I'm the vice chair of this commission. I just like to use the gavel sometimes.
It's really fun.
Yeah. I'm one of the subject matter experts on the commission. In my other life, I'm the state archaeologist and deputy state historic preservation officer.
Wow.
My name is Doug Barnett. I have no recognizable credentials whatsoever, except I am a chairman of the annoyance committee. So I can generally be counted on to annoy whoever is making a presentation. And sometimes ask them, could you repeat that, please? I've been on the commission for 2-3 years now, and just went to the Colorado Historical Society meeting. Good stuff. More and more. And I did find out, it wasn't announced, but I did find out subsequent to the meeting that the on the road meeting, it wasn't on. Normally it's in the agenda, but it wasn't. But it's going to be in Pueblo. And it's going to be the last week of June. So I don't think anybody here has gone beside me, but they're wonderful because everything you don't like about a big meeting with 150, 200 people at elbow is the exact opposite. There's about 25, 30 people there. Everybody gets to know each other. You all sit around, talk about things. I went to Steamboat Springs and I went to Longmont, and they were both great meetings. And the city pays your registration. Yay!
Assuming we have budget money.
Generally. And we'll see what happens.
Thanks. I'm Steve Lane. I'm the chairman of this commission and have been for what seems like an awfully long time. It's getting long. In my other life, I am an architect, and I have done a fair amount of historic preservation work over that time. It's not necessarily a specialty of mine, but it is something I've done over 30 years worth of practice. So.
I'm Rick Jacoby. My credentials are similar to Doug's. I'm a retired doc. But I live on the historic east side, and I wound up doing research on old Longmont, and I made a historic walking tour, and I made a book of the walking tour. So I'm kind of mini specialist on the east side.
Well, I'm Mary Frances O'Day, new, obviously. I am a mid-century enthusiast, so a huge neon sign person. Actually have a lot of expertise, using that loosely, enthusiasm for Route 66 and mid-century architecture, and thus was kind of excited about this group in general. I've also done some work on like older homes, historic preservation personally, but it's just a hobby. So, but I'm a web designer, so I can do anything. So that's kind of fun. I actually have a website for retro motels across the country. So.
I'm Joan Peck, the mayor of Longmont, and I am here as the liaison of the board, and I love it. I've only been to 2 or 3 meetings because it's something totally out of what I do every day. And I think, oh, this is interesting. Nobody's really annoyed all the time.
I'll give it time.
Oh, they come to council, but they're really annoying.
They'll show up, but it's not real.
That's great.
So I'm Suzanne Sibley. I've been on the commission for a while now as well. I am my other life is I'm an interior designer. I work for a builder out of Louisville. I worked on my master's in historic preservation, but I never finished it. So somewhere between enthusiast, who knows?
You're an educated
Yeah, I know a few words, but yeah, I did more interior stuff and a little bit of exterior in previous jobs and whatnot. So that's it. But yeah, and I live on the north side in a 1968 ranch, not that historic.
Hey, that's historic.
It is now, but
Sadly, for those of us that it's actually historic.
right?
So. Okay, great. Thank you. And of course, we also have our recording secretary, Yost, here with us.
She keeps us in line as well.
Yes, and does a massively excellent job of documenting what it is that we said last time so that we can all remember it the next time we forgot. All right, so next on our agenda is public invited to be heard. I do not see anyone from the public, so we'll go ahead and open and close that component of the meeting and move on to our discussion items. First being a recap of accomplishments from last year. It's always nice to sort of just take a peek back and see that we actually were able to make some things happen.
So yeah, we did some things. We got the Tower of Compassion landmarked. It's now under consideration for National Register listing. It went before the State Review Board, and so the State Review Board said, yes, please. And
Which means it is listed on the state.
yes,
Yeah.
so it's listed.
Okay.
It's now listed on the
Yeah.
state, and Damien is putting together the National Register nomination, so it will be going there. So that will be a nice feather in our cap if that gets listed on the National Register. We completed the survey plan, finally. The commission approved the final building relocation plan for the Carlson Farm, which is part of the Prospect community. We have done our first demolition review under the new ordinance. Good news is I met with the property owner last week, so he is trying to figure out how he can make it work. One thing we discussed, because it is such a small house, it would be difficult to do an accessory dwelling unit that meets our size requirements. So he's thinking about doing an addition to the property to expand the square footage and then do an ADU based on that. But he is working to figure out how he can preserve that structure and work with the structure and make it work for him as well. Other things not on this slide, did 8 administrative certificates of appropriateness. Those tend to be things like re-roofs and things that aren't necessarily too visible. In one case, it was replacement of non-original windows on a 30-year-old addition, so doing some renovation work on the rear of the property. I did one section 106 review related to a trail project, everything was good to go there. And then finally, in January, we had our second appeal of the same project to City Council, and Council upheld Historic Preservation's decision on that. We all remember it well, so I'm not going to recap the pain. But the commission's decision was upheld, so. All right, we'll move on to the next item.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh,
Before we
sorry.
just any
Any
questions or
comments,
follow-up
questions?
on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I know we weren't involved, but at the same National Review Board meeting where the Tower of Compassion was listed to the state register, so was the Longmont Buddhist Temple. So, and I think some of that might be coming back to us for a potential local listing if we were interested. I'm not sure it's eligible for the National Register, but I thought that was a really fun addition that I don't think we were expecting. So it was nice to see that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's yet another site that relates to Longmont's long history with the Japanese American community here in this country.
So I got an email about that from the state, did I forward that to you?
Oh, I think so.
I thought it was.
I think so. It's all kind of in order right now. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I did, but I'll double check.
We did not have any tax credit applications last year.
I had one
Did you
tax
have
credit
one?
application, I forgot all about that. It was an administrative,
Okay.
it was a re-roof COA, so it did
Okay.
not require, it did not require input or approval by the commission, but it was for a re-roof, so we did process that as well.
Okay.
So thank you for that reminder.
Sure. Yeah, that's one that I think I always like to keep track of, right?
Mhm.
Just because that's
It's a benefit.
that's really kind of a big carrot for doing this as a home and one of the landmark building is to be able to get somebody else to help pay it for some of the stuff. So.
Absolutely.
Anything else on 2024? Okay, great. Yeah, so then let's roll into the survey plan.
So I do have enough, I did make enough copies of this one. So what I was thinking with this is just do a little bit of an interactive exercise. I'll just start passing those around. And unless anyone has any other or better ideas, I was thinking have everyone, we can discuss it, but then once we discuss the different areas, have everyone kind of write down their top 3, and we can rank them accordingly. One thing to consider, we are interested in pursuing some grants for this. One challenge is that many of the grants do require a cash match, so we are in the process of doing the 2026 budget, so that's something we would need to consider for the budget process. So, so that's something to consider. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Commissioner Lane, and I will go ahead and get everyone some Post-it notes passed out as well.
At least I get a typing, not a misspelling.
No,
Just 23.
Someone hitting the and the.
Okay, so I think we talked about this a little bit high level the last time we had a meeting in December that reviewed the plan for the last time. But maybe not everybody was at that meeting, and it's probably good to sort of review. Yeah, so it's reflected in here, right? So we have a commission priority this commission priority column that's on this sheet reflects what we talked about in the December meeting. Bone Farm, Cannery, Old North being 3rd. Yeah. Brown's Apple Farm at 4th. And the Kitely at 5, and we did have them add, and it's unfortunate that it's sort of on its own little outlying page, but the agricultural sites in an area that we didn't really capture, particularly in the survey plan itself, because it's really just an outlier, but there's some, I think, value in keeping it on the page and talking about it because it represents essentially all the outlying agricultural areas, properties that might potentially be, in danger. For example, that sort of Slatin Drive 7-Eleven, barn project that I think is a great example of something that came up, and thankfully the Planning Commission referred it to us, and we got in front of it and were able to do something about it. But I'm sure there's a lot of others sort of scattered out there. So I guess I'll open it up to any further comment on order. So basically the idea is that we're going to need to grab some funding, and whether that's something that City Council outright provides or does a match and we match with a grant, or there are some non-competitive non-matching grants.
Yes.
So there's sort of like 3 tiers of monies available. Is it?
Yeah, so, and I appreciate that you went ahead and identified some of the grants, and so I wonder if we need to have an understanding of what money is available and what amounts, and then, so for CLG grants in Colorado, municipalities don't have to come up with a match because SHF provides the match every year. Those are competitive though. The deadline for 2025 just ended, which we had all discussed, we knew. Those are due in January. But, and I'm trying to find, and I apologize that I forgot to look this up before we came. I forget what the, how much the maximum CLG grants are for. Are they like 75,000?
I think so.
Okay, so CLGs.
Sounds right.
Yeah.
Don't book me on that.
No, I know, we'd want to double check. No match, max of 75K. State Historical Fund, SHF grants, there are different levels. There's assessment grants, there are mini grants which are up to 50,000. Assessment grants are like 10,000, and I think we're beyond that for any of these properties. Those would be perhaps other things we are interested in when we get into design guidelines or whatever we do. 50,000 mini grants, that does require a, I'll have to double check by municipality.
25%?
I didn't think it was as high as 25 for us, but that's the number that's in my head.
Okay.
If it is serving a BIPOC community, it's a 5% grant. So if any of these neighborhoods are historically BIPOC, then we could apply for a BIPOC grant and only have a 5% match. They also do grants up to $250,000. So if we wanted to bunch these and do multiple neighborhoods at a time and get a bigger amount of money, but it will, again, unless it's BIPOC neighborhoods, it will still be the 25% match. You can only match cash for State Historic Fund. You can't match in kind. You can match in kind for CLGs, but that's kind of moot since we've got SHF paying things for CLG grants. But you can use any other cash source. So if there was a federal grant, if there was a state grant from a different agency, you can match all of those sources with the SHF grants. Private donations, anything like that, as long as it's cash.
Did they put that? They did put a number down here for a rough approximation of cost for each, area to be surveyed, so you can kind of get a sense of what those dollar figures might be, right? And those are rolling, right?
The
SHF grants?
The assessment grants are rolling, the mini grants and the bigger grants, the full grants, are April 1st and October 1st. If we wanted to try to get in for an April 1st, which I know is going to be tight for us, we have to have a letter of intent into the SHF staff by, or a letter of interest by next month. And I can double check those dates momentarily. The other state grant that I'm aware of is the Main Street grant through DOLA. I'm not exactly sure I'm not as positive, again, I can look it up, I'm not as positive on the match requirements or how much they fund. I know a lot of rural communities use those because I think their match requirements are less stringent than SHF. Rural communities also use SHF, but I think DOLAs are meant for communities that are trying to get work done and maybe don't have a lot of cash on hand to do these matches. So I'll look that up momentarily too.
Holly, what is BIPOC?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine. It's all right.
So BIPOC is a shorthand term that a lot of folks use to identify underrepresented communities.
Okay.
It means Black, Indigenous, people of color.
Oh, got it. Yes. Okay.
Academics have like their own kind of term for it. It's about different intersectionalities and experiences, but we use it at History Colorado just to mean these communities who are typically underserved.
All the groups.
And
Okay.
it does include women.
Sometimes
I guess I'm thinking about the barn, the barn by Zlatan, because it has a strong association with one of the few female homesteaders in the state, so.
Yeah, I think we can try to make the argument. We've had people make the argument that I've got a student actually from a university back east who's doing an archaeological investigation of a historically Jewish community. And we had to make the argument that it was BIPOC. And I don't think anybody disagrees these are underserved communities. It's just when this kind of carve out to SHF was created, it was really focusing on BIPOC. But yeah, we can
Always
I'll
try.
it that way. Yeah.
The kind of neighborhood, did that come up at one of the America 250 with a historic home that was associated with
Possibly.
Hispanic families?
Possibly.
250, 150 girls.
Yeah, or the 250, 150 program.
Yeah.
It might have been at
I
the
feel like it was
at
a
the
tiny
museum.
home that was attached to the pieces that were dedicated at the library.
Okay.
I will look into this,
Yeah,
sorry.
we'll look into that.
Triggered a
Good,
thought.
good question.
Holly, I have a quick question.
Yes.
I love your quick summary on these grants, because every time I try to read through these, my head starts swimming.
Yeah.
But I thought the Main Street grant was mostly for commercial older buildings, is that right, or am I mistaken?
I don't know, because I don't work with Main Street as much, I'm just
Yeah.
familiar
Okay.
with it, but I think,
They're typically more commercial areas.
That's right.
yeah,
Yeah.
And I know our economic development, one of our economic development
Yeah.
specialists was looking at,
yeah.
I think she asked me about them if it was a historic preservation thing, and I was like, I think it's an LDDA thing. Anyway, the conversation is happening on what might qualify for Main Street.
Right, but the downtown historic district, right, I think, most of these are more residential. But I do wonder if there are some areas that might benefit from us at least looking into it. You know, and I don't know how they treat the agricultural sites, you know, those, right, in the interior, like little farms. So, sorry guys, I didn't think about doing homework before I got here. This was not the part of the budget I thought about. And I'm not a grant specialist, but I can point you guys in the direction of our grant specialists.
You know enough to be dangerous. Or helpful, very helpful.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question about the bond farm? Is that only for the house that's on the property, or is it for the farm itself?
It would be for the whole neighborhood.
It would be. So are the design standards are there design standards with that developer?
With the developer, aside from our standard residential design standards, not necessarily. You know, the survey is really, the survey recommendation was really to look at the larger neighborhood and see if there was, to document, you know, the homes, but also to see if there was any potential for any sort of, you know, listing or district or of any sort that might be helpful.
Yeah, so this is really, just so we're all clear about what we're trying to do with this. So right now, we have, you can go on to the cities, I think you can go back on the website, it's back on the website now, these,
In a roundabout way.
Every time I look, it's different.
Yeah, so we have a whole bunch of cultural resource surveys done of homes and other buildings in the east side and west side of Longmont. And they were and maybe are still available online to where you can just go to a property, click on the address and get a whole bunch of documentation.
And if you can't find them, call me and I'll email
Yeah.
the relevant one to you.
And so it's a really great resource, and it's part of what I think was prepared to establish those two areas as districts, as historic districts. But, you know, that's not the only two places where there are old, you know, architecturally rich homes in the whole entire city. So this plan is to essentially take these other neighborhoods that have been identified in the plan and go do a very similar thing. Pay a consultant to drive through the whole neighborhood and identify homes that might be architecturally significant, and do some additional research to find out that there might be some homes where there might be people that were significant in the history of Longmont that were associated with it. Doesn't have to be a glorious home, but it could be very, very small house. But if it had somebody very important associated with it, then you know that makes it rich too. I don't know that we necessarily have a lot of like archaeological sites, but that would be the other thing that they could potentially, you know, identify, right? And so it's essentially just to go through and identify that data and then provide some additional research and information on those homes so that we end up with that kind of a database in that neighborhood. That's all it is, right? There's no strings attached to it for any of the homeowners. It's a resource, but then potentially some homeowner in a bonfire neighborhood might say, wow, I had no idea that my house was, you know, that this person lived here, or that it really was that special, and gee, I think maybe I would like to create a landmark here and take advantage of this stuff. It's really just a data point to say, here's some reason, and you know, from there we back away. We're not trying to come in and you know, overtake somebody's property rights or anything. It's just data. So that's really the point of this plan. It's just a pile, and then once we have all of those neighborhoods with that information identified, now we have a really rich database of what the city has for resources. And then ideally the next step would be to create an actual preservation plan that started to say, hey, this is what our goals are. This would be a big public process, right? This is not a public process, it's just a research data gathering process. It would follow with a public process that would say, hey, here's all the data. What do you guys think as, you know, citizens of Longmont? What do you want to do about it? I mean, do you want to create more preservation? Do you want to create other standards? Do you want to have guidelines? Do you want to do all this stuff? That would be a very public, open, participatory kind of process.
Can I ask a potentially dumb, maybe loaded question? And maybe it's in the report, but I'm noticing the redevelopment pressures column and the report priority column. How were those determined in really loose? Because there's high, medium, low, and high, possible, low. I just wondered if there was a criteria for, is that part of the report, or is that?
Yeah, if you read through the detail in some of the neighborhoods, it talks about, you know, some of the development pressures. You know, for example, Bone Farm is labeled as high because there's a big chunk of land that's been looked at a handful of times to do development.
To do something totally different to tear it down?
No, not even necessarily. It's a vacant piece of ground.
Okay.
But it's a, you know, we're talking, I can't remember the number of units, but I would say 60 or something
Yeah,
like that.
something like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, a potentially large change, and if that, you know, if that impacts, yeah, that could impact the neighborhood substantially, right?
Okay.
So it's, I don't think we necessarily have a high pressure of people wanting to come in and just wipe these properties out and do different things, but different neighborhoods based on, you know, their age and position and the number of vacant lots nearby are under different kind of strains.
So low maybe means that they're not kind of in danger as much as the ones that are on the high. It's not so much as, oh, we really love this neighborhood, so it's high. It's more of a, there's more danger to the.
Yeah, a low priority might be a neighborhood that's built out with very little vacant land, fair amount of homogeneity in its, you know, in its neighborhood, and we think it's valuable, but it's unlikely someone would come in and try to wholesale.
Chances are it's not changing real quickly.
Right.
Okay, gotcha.
Right. Well,
Okay.
some of these others might change substantially if, you know, if something swayed one way or the other.
Okay, thank you. Just, that would take a lot of reading probably to get that.
Yeah, and just time, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that final survey plan is included as an attachment on the, I believe Maria sent a link to
Yes.
everyone. So yeah, if you need a little light reading, it is attached to that
I didn't get it.
agenda item.
So I have a question about match. I know money is always tricky, but one of the things about tax credits is that I believe in the past that the city gets a certain percentage of the tax credits because we are CLG. In the past, that had been set aside for historic preservation. I remember talking about this a few years ago. We had something like $14,000.
Right.
It's never come back up. I don't believe we've used it. I don't know if that has grown or not.
exists.
I can dig out those old notes. I think
Okay.
that was when Karen was still our planner liaison.
That's like 2 liaisons, 3 liaisons
Yeah.
before me.
Yeah.
Who's that, Sarah?
Sarah.
No, it was Karen Bryant.
Brian,
Brian.
yes.
Okay. It was
Yeah.
from the planning department.
Yeah, it was from
Yeah.
staff level.
Yeah, and I guess if we were talking, let's just first say, for example, the bone farm, right? That's our number one priority if everybody's still sort of agrees to that. We've got an estimated cost of $18,000, call it 20. So you're talking about the city needing to provide $5,000 basically.
I know.
Right, I mean, so can I make the assumption that if we asked staff to ask council to throw $5,000 at a matching grant, that would not be particularly horrifically controversial? Like, what's the process for
Yeah.
that kind of a thing?
Actually-
Budget here.
Yeah.
I'm going to go in and fine.
Well, actually, the city, Harold and his staff don't have anything to do with our contingency fund. You would come directly to council.
Okay,
Where I see the risk would be like remembering the woman who came to council about her windows and saying, this is what I need to live up to what the historic preservation wants. Would council support that? Then we would get into, well, you did it for this person. Why aren't you doing it for me?
Mhm.
And, but I think it's worth the effort.
For like if it were for a larger area
Yeah,
survey
of course.
though, not just a single
Specific
property
property.
specific survey, it would be just for an entire neighborhood to do the survey.
Yeah, that might be better.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't think I would get into that bond farm argument again. Because if you supported it, then people who were adamantly against it would just be furious with council. And so I think for the survey, the one thing that as you've been talking about this, is we are looking at Envision Longmont, especially our codes. And what the public has a real problem with Envision Longmont is the terms areas of change and, oh shoot, compatibility.
Compatibility and areas of change and areas of stability, yeah.
And I talked to Erin Fosdick, who was the author of the whole Envision Longmont, and she said, well, those terms are subjective. And I said, that's the problem,
Yeah.
right there, is that everybody, even planning and zoning, each person has a different idea of what compatibility means. So my question, because I love this whole discussion, on the survey, as we look at codes, if we go out to that website in the database and see, I will bring this up, but I would like your input. Not right now, you can think about it. Could we in the codes incorporate areas of change and compatibility with the historic, with the I'm sorry, what's that word you used? To get the survey done of the area as far as compatibility. I'm trying to figure out how do we talk to the residents, work in Envision Longmont, and preserve our city. So those are the things that go through my mind as sitting here, as we're fighting all the time with the residents in that goofy Envision Longmont. So,
Which is, it's time to update it.
oh, I
So,
agree.
Yeah, it's time to update it, and I know, as through the current budget process, it's the question of how much money can we budget for that update.
Right.
So, because it's not gonna, it's gonna, I mean, I'll be the one managing it, so,
Well, let's talk offline.
yeah, we'll talk offline.
Yeah,
Thank you.
but I guess I'd want to come back and say, just to be sure everybody's clear, like, this process, this survey process is not meant to be in any way controversial.
It's a document,
Right.
you're just documenting.
It's not creating guidelines, it's not adding any layers of complexity, it's not adding any requirements. All it is research. All it is saying, hey, in this neighborhood, we have 20 houses that are architecturally significant or have, folks associated with it that were important to Longmont. That's it, it's just data, it's just data.
It's not controversial until the residents get on it.
Well,
And then it is.
yeah, I
But
guess.
you know, with Bone Farm,
Yeah.
the problem is that we're calling this neighborhood Bone Farm because that's just such a red button title.
Yeah.
Everyone's gonna get their hackles up as soon as you say the city's addressing Bone Farm.
Exactly, that's why.
However, the people who are getting their hackles up are the people who want to preserve Bone Farm. And this is working towards preservation. And if we can somehow say, looking at preservation of Bone Farm, we would like to, say that at first, it might not be so controversial, it might be something we could do. I'm just thinking.
For example, when the proposal was submitted to the city, a whole pile of people came to our commission
Yes.
and
Right.
spoke at public invited to be heard.
Yeah.
And our reply had to be, thank you for coming, I'm sorry, we
We're not
have
doing
no
anything."
jurisdiction in this
Exactly.
area whatsoever.
Exactly.
And we're not gonna get it without any of this
Correct.
to start with. So if people want to have, if people want to have a Bone Farm neighborhood historic district, then this is the first thing that would have to happen in order for that
Have
to
to
be
know what it
developed.
is, yeah.
Right? And so this is just a piece of information that you as a neighborhood can use and choose to move forward with further or not. Doesn't matter.
Correct.
And
And that's,
So do they know that?
not yet,
Okay.
not yet, I'm thinking ahead.
Okay.
Of
So
what's
it's
gonna
good.
come at us.
Unless they're watching
There's gotta be
this
steps,
video.
so, yeah.
So this is the
Commission.
opposition to the high density.
Right.
No,
No, not necessarily.
I'm trying to like
Okay.
backpedal the historic part of this.
So that's what I would like to say too, is I don't think we should ever say that historic preservation is ever in opposition to any affordable housing goals or
Right.
other
Right.
goals that the city of Longmont might have for capacity, right? They don't have to be in opposition to each other. And back to
Agreed.
Chairman Lane's point, the more information we have, the more we can have more nuanced plans that make everyone miserable, which means that.
I'll go with that.
I think you're right, because I think
Okay.
they would expect with historic evaluation that they could preserve more than they can.
No.
And you're right, they can't.
Right.
They could maybe design additional
Yeah.
development to be more
Yeah.
compatible, but
And
that's
that's what I'm
about-
looking at, architectural
Okay.
style. And
You can't-
Right.
Rather
and I
than,
think that's, and I think that's the way to go.
that's valuable.
Right, instead of saying, yeah, let's put up an 18-story skyscraper, well, let's put up multifamily houses that meet whatever housing needs Longmont has goals for, but still fit into this neighborhood in the ways that the people who live here appreciate. That's beyond me, but that is the tools that I would hope we can help get the city.
And that's where I was going as well.
Yeah, okay.
Not to change our vision as far
Right.
as.
Yeah, this is something that this type of data could be very helpful as we move forward with the Envision Longmont update, as we do the historic preservation plan, which I see as a component of the Envision Longmont update.
And if you want to, maybe just as an idea, thinking about this, so we put Bone Farm number one when we talked about it, but if that's going to be, if people are just going to start freaking out before they begin to understand what's happening, perhaps it's better to take, for example, Cannery and do that
Yeah.
first,
Yeah.
to have an example.
And if I may, on that note, fortunately, I'm no longer the planner doing these reviews, but the Bone Farm property, that proposed development, does currently have an application under review for a preliminary plat.
Right.
So there will be another public hearing on that. So the timing could be, the timing is something we might need to be cognizant of.
And the Cannery's already got that preserved, don't they?
But the
One
building
building,
is, but it's
yeah.
a larger district as well. So that building is really kind of the anchor of that district.
Right, right. And again, it's a sizable district.
Do we need a survey on that district yet, or has that been done?
None of these have been done, yeah, so
Oh,
right.
basically, we only have the east side and west side, and that's it. So we have this table of however many neighborhoods, I've lost track, but that, you know, there's 12 or something. So these are all areas that we've identified that could benefit from a survey, right? So there's a lot of work to do.
I would like a presentation of what you're doing at council before you ask for dollars.
Okay.
Match.
I think I'm agreeing, I agree with problem with Bone Farm being a kind of a red button, we call it. And it may be that because they have something, an application that's going through a process right now, that we might want to just hold off on any recommendations on Bone
I
Farm
agree.
and just put it into the abeyance category because there's all of this activity, and otherwise we risk getting into the middle of this discussion.
Exactly, I
Right.
agree.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
that could
totally.
be a problem.
Yep.
Very good point.
Or it's-
I just brought it up because it's number one.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
that's just an
Yes, good
alphabetical
point.
thing. but-
Yeah.
Oh,
That's just
okay.
that's just a
I didn't know that.
fluke about, yeah.
Now that I look at it, it's obvious.
And yeah, most of the people in the neighborhood already hate me, so.
I had enough emails on that, let's don't go down that road. I would vote for the cannery, number one. That area is well-liked, and I think we would have the backing if we gave match to that.
Okay.
And is it worth, I'm kind of feeling like maybe we do one of, I mean, if we can get in front of council and make a little presentation of what it is we're kind of, we've done this, there's this plan, this is what the goal is, here's why, so on and so forth, and we'd like to do this one first. Just do it,
Yep.
get an example, understand what it really is, it's not a big ask,
Yeah.
then we're probably, there's no way that's happening before April. So that's,
Yeah, I mean,
that's
the
a-
council agendas are getting pretty well set for, they usually get pretty well set a good month or two, a couple of months in advance sometimes. Just as I sit in on the
Right.
agenda meetings.
But knowing also how colossally long all of this stuff takes.
Yes.
If we put a goal in for the October 1st grant cycle to apply for a grant, to start, you know, that first survey.
I
feel like enough
support, I
time to-
support the idea of the cannery being number one and being our sole objective for now. And just put everything else on the, we'll keep talking about it and let's see what happens. We're not really sure what's gonna happen when we put the cannery up, what kind of discussion we're gonna have, you know, with council and how they're gonna feel about doing any of this. At least we've got a candidate up there that's gonna be moderately easy to discuss. We shouldn't have any real fireworks. And then if it goes smoothly, then we can start to see what happens next. What's the next step? What's the next step in the process? And we can kind of move it along a little bit. And then when it gets far enough along that we're comfortable in how the path is going, then we can start working on bringing another one up. But you don't crowd the field, and you keep the focus on getting something done. And the whole idea is to accomplish something here.
Not a
More than
lot.
one
Very good
idea.
point. Yeah.
We put this thing up like it is, all we're doing is guaranteeing that it's gonna be debated for a little while, and as we used to say in the legislature, it'll be sent to subcommittee,
Right.
where all good ideas die.
Quiet.
Can I ask another dumb question? What is the money going to? So you're gonna get grant money, then what does that pay for?
For the research.
Yeah, so we'd hire a
Hire a firm
consultant.
to do the
Yeah.
consulting.
Okay, so that's just for, okay, so
Yeah.
that's the next
Just to get
step.
information.
Yeah,
I mean,
and so
that's
then they go
what
up there and they
I'm
like
saying.
look at each building and they're like, oh, it's got,
So it's an in-depth survey rather than a,
Correct.
this,
Right,
these
rather
are the
than-
boundaries and vaguely this is what's in it.
and we drove through the neighborhood and a
Yeah,
bunch
yeah,
of stuff
yeah.
looks
They're a
old.
bunch of old
Yeah.
homes, so
Yeah.
okay,
So the
okay.
best part was
That
the
one's not
map.
kept up.
The best part, Mary Frances, we had a map that covered the whole table. You
Uh,
had to walk
Yeah.
around it
Last
and
year.
put pins in it.
Well, I
Yeah,
got
and
two
ultimately,
thoughts.
this is,
That's a
this
little
is the
more-
priority answer, this is the prioritization to say, this, to
Yeah.
figure out exactly which one we're gonna take to council and, you know, and pursue the grant for.
So I got two thoughts. First, there is no dumb questions. They're the best
Yeah.
questions that have the easiest answers. And half of us probably are asking it ourselves silently, right? That's the best thing about
I'm
dumb
good with those
questions.
questions, so.
The second thing, and this, I'm not sure I'm for this, I'm just throwing this out as devil's advocate. Yes, doing one would be simpler and maybe more straightforward, but we also said this takes a while and a lot of footwork and a lot of paperwork. Would it be that much more to do two? Because if grants go up to 50,000 and these both are, if number 2 and 3 as we have it listed are 25,000 each, should we apply for two, one on the east side, one on the west side? At the same time, it might be a lot more labor efficient as far as city staff going through the paperwork. It probably wouldn't be more onerous. I don't know if it'd be harder with a bigger amount for matching for the council to say yes or no, but maybe we'd get a lot more done a little quicker. So that's just a thought. I'm not sure what the answer is to that.
So I was actually kind of thinking the same thing. If we're really focusing on these state grants, CLG and SHF, the lead time to get all these materials together, to apply, and then to actually get it, if we get a grant in October, if we apply for the October 1st deadline and we get the grant, we won't be able to start until spring of '26 on that survey by the time the money comes through. So we're looking at least a year before we can start work. So if we could put a couple of these together, because the grants go either up to 50 or 250, it might be easier on us in terms of that front end labor. And I'm wondering if from a political point of view, if we're concerned about bringing residents along, if instead of looking at the neighborhoods that have redevelopment pressures, what if we focus on the neighborhoods that have natural disaster risks? And we look at these folks, there's several neighborhoods here that say that there's risks from, they only identified flooding. I think that,
Fire might be a big
It's
one.
still-
that's what I was thinking
Yeah.
too, like, and we could
Longmont
probably
Estates.
determine that based on our own brains in where these neighborhoods are. But yeah, if we identify things maybe more on disaster risks instead of development pressures or other weird political stuff that we're trying to stay out of, then maybe we can bring folks along.
So thinking of the fire risks, because I've thought about this for a while, especially since the Marshall fire, is
Yeah.
that our St. Vrain area is loaded with dead timber. And I don't know if there are any areas along the St. Vrain that are historical, but especially from Boston to airport, those are areas that are historically significant.
Are our risk management folks working on any of the FEMA emergency management plans right now?
I think they are, but of course everything's on hold because of
I know.
yeah.
Well, and I've been having a couple of conversations with different governments. It's tough because it's hard to put cultural resources into a static plan.
Yes.
But if they have already, if we can look at it from the opposite side, not like how can we shove cultural resources into this, but here's the areas that we've identified, you know, how does that map on to our map of cultural resources?
I would suggest getting, her name just skipped me, but the chief of the fire.
Golden?
Yes. And
Okay.
and get with her. That's information I wouldn't have any
Okay.
details on.
Is it okay for me to contact her?
Hey,
Okay,
go for it.
chief fire person, we'll figure out her name.
Chief
No,
fire.
I
Okay.
know her quite well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you want to touch base with me, maybe we can
Okay.
I can set up a Teams meeting or
Yeah.
something with us.
If they've got it under control, which I'm assuming they do, then there's no
Yeah.
point in us surveying it
Well, and
unless.
And I'm working on these plans in other capacities, and so if I can have some insight that then we can maybe have some, that we can apply to how we are identifying neighborhoods for risk, I think that'd be super helpful.
It would
Because
be
I'm
very
afraid
helpful, yes.
Fire is, after the Marshall Fire,
And the California fire,
I
yeah.
know, I worked on that and it was hard. Yeah.
Yeah, just touch base with me and I can set something up for us to talk with Chief Goldman. She's a fantastic resource.
Okay.
So, and Holly, can we talk offline as well about the contingency fund that we've gotten? We've already got some priorities in that fund, so
Okay.
what the amount of the match would be and whatever.
Yeah, in terms of
What you're
the
going after.
grants and
Yeah.
stuff, yeah.
Okay.
So, and we can pull somebody who is actually good at grant stuff in. I just delegate to my staff.
And we do have grant writers with the city as well.
Yeah.
I wrote grants years ago, so.
So I think what I'm hearing, we maybe don't have I don't know that we're going to get a focus of necessarily a pick of a particular neighborhood out of this meeting, and I think that's okay. But I do think that we have a strategy, which is get on council's agenda to make a presentation to them about this plan and what it is and what we would like to do moving forward so that we can get their sort of understanding and presumably blessing to say, okay, yeah, this is a goal that council supports.
Sure. Do you think that would be more of a study session or a regular meeting?
Probably, I don't know. Let me see what's on the study session
Okay.
sometimes.
And I can talk to Harold as well.
Yeah. And I'll talk to him on Wednesday, so.
And I would just say if we can make that a priority, again, because we know that that's just going to take time because of things that are already full. Then once we'll have a date where that presentation happened, we'll have a couple of commission meetings in between now and that time, and we can potentially discuss a little further what folks, with other information that comes to light in between, we can discuss a little further what we think as a commission might be the appropriate strategy in terms of one or two neighborhoods and which those are. That anybody have a
I think
problem with
that's
that?
great. No, I think that's great, and I love the idea of having like cannery, which is definitely got some historic things happening, but then some of these others, if we can incorporate some of these other important topics, the fire and all that, I think that's a great way, because then you're probably a lot less, going to get a lot less resistance from folks. So I think that's a phenomenal way to go if we can make that work. Yeah.
Yeah, we all have to work together.
Yeah, that's great.
It's a theory.
Yep.
Okay, so I think that kind of gets us to a stopping point on the survey plan, unless anybody has any other questions about that.
All right.
The only other comment I have on this survey plan, I read through the whole thing real briefly before this. They still screwed up St. Stephen's Church and that thing. It still says it's down in Southmore Park. For the record, it is 468 Main Street. It's on page 8. The picture is mislabeled. And there are two St. Stephen's churches, and this is 468 Main Street. Duly noted.
Thank you, Commissioner, for doing that. Since we're on that topic, I'll reiterate my desire for a high resolution.
I do have a high resolution. We just sent the
Right.
lower one for.
Okay, but we have that.
I have a high resolution version.
One, excellent.
If we're adding edits really quick, sorry. And I don't know why I didn't see this before, but when there's the engagement on page 2, the engagement with HPC, there at the bottom of the page, there's a sentence that it says, with particular attention to the long neglected Hispanic history of the area. And given like what we were just talking about and going to the meeting, I would love it to either say different groups or add indigenous, Japanese, and blah, blah, blahs, like to broaden that.
Okay.
So that was
So
I
which
don't know, read my
section?
chicken scratch on that.
Is that a fact?
Long neglected
That we-
Hispanic history.
We're comfortable with the fact that there's been a long neglected attitude towards the Hispanic. I don't feel that in any of my discussions or relations.
Yeah, I just, when I read that
Why label us
sentence,
with
I thought,
neglecting something?
So,
you know?
So I work with El Comite in, El Comite, and they have a book that's, We Were Here Too.
Right.
And it is, I believe, within that community, it's a belief that it's long neglected.
By us?
Yeah,
By the city.
just
Yeah,
in general.
In general,
probably.
I believe,
Probably not
so.
a state, everybody.
Now, I don't know if that's perspective or reality, I don't
You feel
know.
that you've been neglecting the Hispanic community? I don't think so.
I don't think
the city
currently.
council has been.
No,
I've been following city
Historically,
council
yes.
for
Historically, though.
4 years.
Well, yeah,
you
before
know.
that, I would say.
No.
It's hard to get into that community that's why I love Mayor Pro Tem Susie Hidalgo Ferring, because they don't want an old white woman coming over to their meetings. I mean,
Mhm.
I need to have a Mexican hot Latina come with me because she understands. She grew up and they just automatically look at you and say, you don't get it. And I think,
No, But
well,
neglect to
probably
me.
not. So this is a double-edged sword, is what I'm saying, is that what they consider as neglect may be a result of not participating. And that's what I find a lot.
Being where the majority does.
Yes.
But on the
And
one
they're
hand, our door is open.
Yeah.
Okay, our door is open. Number two, nobody has walked in that we have rejected or in any way neglected. So to say that we are, neglecting is an active verb, and it implies that we're doing something which is actively against what they are trying to accomplish. But I think every time we've had a discussion like this, it's been the opposite. We've been saying, well, how do we, in fact, I may be one of the people, but I think there are others too, who said, we have to have something in here which shows that we're reaching out to the minority communities. It has to be in here, and it was put in. And now that's not necessarily what you would do in a work like this, but as a commission, we felt it was important that we actively seek out their feedback before doing any of this stuff.
Well, I think a survey, because they are talking historically, and it is about maintaining, preserving history as far as, is there an area of town that historically, and that might be worth a study within itself, rather than, because we've had Japanese and Chinese.
Well,
We have a huge
historically,
Vietnam.
Were there parts of this city that were like the Hispanic
Yes.
area?
Yes.
This city was redlined right along the train
Yes.
tracks. If you
Yes.
look on the wrong
Yeah.
side of the tracks,
I know we had.
now the historic east side is bisected by the tracks, and I've done research on all the history.
Yeah.
And I can name dozens of white males and white females who lived there. I can't tell you the name of a Hispanic person who lived over
We need to
there.
get their help.
Is there any way?
And so they have been neglected historically.
Yeah.
Yes, we're compensating now, and we are making an effort now, but they have historically been clearly neglected. And also African Americans.
Yeah.
I know nothing about African American history in Longmont, but certainly they've been here. They've come and settled the West in small numbers. I've read that in generalities frequently, but I know
Well,
nothing about
and there's another section where it says, instead of listing groups, it just, it's sort of a blanket, to be inclusive kind of a thing.
Right.
And maybe the sentence, I don't know that we need to necessarily go through all the groups. It just, when I was writing, I was like, oh, what about so-and-so, so-and-so? And I'm like, okay, maybe we just either jettison the sentence
All
or
the
just say
communities, all the communities that.
historically people.
Underrepresented
Yeah, just
groups.
like,
Suzanne,
yeah.
I think if we just deleted that sub-sentence
Mm-hmm.
with particular attention to the long neglected Hispanic history there, we accomplish our goals, because it says, the commission recognized the need to make Longmont's history in diverse communities more visible.
There you go.
Full stop.
Period, yeah.
And then they advocated for this to be an integral part of the city's historical narrative.
That works.
Just leave out that little piece in there. Otherwise, if you don't leave it out, then you're gonna have to widely expand.
Right, then it becomes everybody, yeah, like a list a mile long,
Yeah, the
yeah.
water outlet.
No, I was just thinking when we did the historic east side, that is typically where some of the Spanish-Mexican settlement was. Why cannot that be a part of the historic east side as a history of how did this get started and who lived there first, rather than have it be a different survey? Just
Right.
incorporate it
Yeah.
into, and we do that with every district. You know, this was
So
set
that's what-
first by.
The way I just read it, every one of our pieces of work would take this into account.
Exactly.
What the diverse populations
It's
within
part of it,
that
yeah.
district,
So
what they
maybe
represented
research
and what their history was.
would be viable.
Okay?
Yeah.
Everybody okay with that change? Chad, you got it?
I got it.
Cool.
So I'm gonna see.
I'll shut up. I'll shut up now.
So you're right, you're the little. That's how he introduced himself. Yeah, and we have an opportunity with these surveys in every neighborhood to say, this is something we want people to pay attention to now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good. Okay. My only last comment is now that is anybody else actually sort of confused by the fact that the only neighborhood that's identified as flooding is called Hilltop?
Yeah.
Thank you, I was looking.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
My brain is.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
There's
It's ironic.
It
What
is.
do you want to call it? Hilltop?
Well, that would make more sense. All right. Appreciate that discussion. I think it was good, healthy, and obviously a lot more than we were able to do at the commission hearing, so that's why these kind of meetings are really great. Okay, we've really kind of combined the historic survey plan and the grant calendar and application requirements, I think, all together. I think we're pretty well covered those, right? So now we're on to really anything that we want to talk about for this year moving forward. And we have specifically called out on the agenda communication with property owners in our districts. And again, I go back to the fact that we had one tax credit application over the course of the entire year, but you know, that's I think a big piece that existing property owners have as a resource, and we sure want to make sure that they are aware of that. And then we also have solar panel standards, which we talked about in the previous meeting back in May a little bit, but we never really got into any real depth about the direction. And then the last thing that we have specifically on the agenda is just anything we want to think about for the sesquicentennial.
I'm proud of myself that I put it on there and spell check did not catch it.
Wait, isn't there a semi that's?
There is, yeah, it should actually be semi-sesquicentennial, so that is my.
I was like, I thought it was harder than that.
Yeah, it is the semi-sesquicentennial. I will also note that I did invite
Oh, here it
the
is.
St. Brain Historical Society to attend today.
Right on,
They were unable,
of course.
they were unable to attend, but they will be at the April meeting. So.
Sesquisemi-quincentennial.
Jeez.
Wow.
Supercalifragilistic.
Makes me
Yes.
The 150/250 celebration.
Yeah, we're calling it 150
Right.
for sanity.
So, and again, because what typically happens is we get into these meetings here, and if there's anything that we think, oh boy, we should do something, by the time it's, you know, February, May is right around the corner. So, anyway, let's just chat about the first one. If any commissioners have any thoughts about potential. In the past, we've talked about doing some sort of outreach, some sort of mailer to everybody with a landmarked home and say, did you know, that this is available? And I don't know that we've ever really done that.
Well, we did. 2018.
2018, okay.
I live in a historic home, And I received this letter that was sent
That was Karen.
from Karen Bryant.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Right, that's right.
At the
Yes, she did
time.
that once, yes.
And it says, you live in a historic home, and it talks about what I can and cannot do, and tax rebates and things. And I can tell you there are multiple folks in my neighborhood in historic homes that have improved the exterior without thinking about this. And it goes by all the time. There's jokes about people on Emory Street who have been building stuff without permits, and the people for the city staff that do the permitting and everything drive by every day commuting back and forth. There's no way to enforce this. It really comes down to the owners knowing the rules and applying. And with the tax rebates, they would apply. I think we'd get more engagement if we sent a letter like this out again. It's, I can just, you know, if we're willing to do this. I don't know, how many historic homes do we have?
170.
So less than 200. I mean,
I will also note that our code enforcement system, much like every other code enforcement system I've ever, in any city I've ever worked on in, is complaint driven. So
right,
we are
it's
not,
more an honor
we're not
system
going
almost.
out, we don't have the staff capacity to go out and actively look, oh wait, they did something without a permit. So it's based on neighbors tattling on
Right.
neighbors.
But I think, so, I mean, I can give this letter to you. I mean, it wouldn't
think
take a lot of hours to
yeah.
just kind of basically update a line or two.
Maria
And then it's
actually
the money
found it
to
in
mail
our,
out to 200.
Maria actually found it in our files. So
Oh,
we
okay.
do have it. So we can.
Oh, you're so good. All right. But anyway, I think it's certainly reasonable. Again, it raises awareness a little bit, maybe with some folks who own these homes who don't realize, you know, the historic implications of owning these homes. How much will it raise awareness in general in the community? Not a lot, maybe, but I think it'd be a good and relatively simple thing to do.
So we can take a look at the letter, do an update of it, and possibly at the March meeting have a draft for the commission to review and give their blessing to, and work on getting it out probably Q2 of '24.
Anybody? Sure. Have any objection to that? I do now, that was a while ago, but I do
Yes.
remember that, and I do.
And you were
think-
chairman then too,
I
right?
And we had, following that letter, there were 3 or 4 applications that came in.
There you go.
Within that year, within 6
Yeah.
months, people said, oh, you know, and then it just, you know, then out of sight, out of mind. But there was definitely an uptick, and I think most of them were small. They were administrative in nature, right? But which is almost better, right? It's nothing controversial. There's somebody who wants to get paid to re-roof their house or something. You know?
I would think just word of mouth in the neighborhoods, you know, people get this, they might talk to the neighbor about it, and the neighbor may think, oh, maybe I should designate my home. I mean, it could generate bigger projects too for us,
I'll
which is
also have
fine.
to check and see what kind of budget we have for mailing, so.
Yeah, that's the biggest issue is the mailing budget, 200 letters.
We get a grant for stamps.
Bike them around the neighborhoods, just pop them in people's mailboxes.
We could all chip in $5 for stamps.
All right, great. Well, that sounds like that was an easy one. Solar panels. For those of you who were on the commission, that we did have a conversation about that in, I think, the May.
And I'm going to let Melanie talk about that
Okay.
because she did some research last week and had a memo that we weren't able to get out. But she did some research on that last week and put together kind of an overview based on a lot of what Denver has done because they have a pretty robust set of standards for solar panels in their historic districts as well. So.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think Denver had the best guidance as far as specific places to put solar panels. They have really nice diagrams that show recommendations of if you want to offset it from the eaves or the architectural features. So I think at a very high level, they had some good guidelines and guiding principles. I also took a look at NREL and the National Alliance for Preservation Commission. So it all started to sound very similar, and I think that Denver did a really good job in distilling it. So I think important things to consider would be the visual impacts of the solar panels. That they have some specific guidelines for the primary structures or various types of roof types, corner properties. I know in planning that comes up so often. Accessory structures and ground-mounted systems. So I think it'd be important to consider what comes up often if there are accessory structures that are in view of the, what am I trying to say, from the public?
Yeah, the right of way.
From the right of way, having some guidelines that maintain the historic property of the structure, you're using some minimally invasive techniques, considering new techniques like solar panel roof tiles and things like that. So I think there was a lot of really good guidance and diagrams, but I would be curious to know what comes up often and what aspects are you particularly concerned about, or is it view from the right of way? Do we get a lot of ground mounted structures?
We actually haven't had, at least in my tenure here, just admittedly brief, we have not had any requests for solar panels. There was one property owner that was going to do a tile type system on an accessory building, but they opted not to do that just because there were some issues with the product. So they decided not to do that at the time. But I think more than anything, this discussion is really being proactive on our part, and just getting ahead of that curve. Because we can't necessarily, we can't prohibit it, solar panels, and nor I don't think we should, but it's just how do we do them in a way that's sensitive to the context.
I was going to say, I had, the solar panel folks are very happy to come out to your house and evaluate your place for free.
Yeah.
And I've had mine evaluated last year, and I had it about 15 years ago. But both times they said the same thing. I don't think we're going to get many applications in Old Town because of all the mature trees, which causes a huge problem. And again, the gables are facing different ways, and the angles on the houses, on the roofs are often shaded. It's probably not going to be a big thing, but I agree we should probably have something in place so if someone comes to us, we're not just making up the rules seemingly for them, we have some guidelines. If I recall our discussion last time, I looked at the Denver guidelines and I said these look great, and I suggested we consider adopting those. And Steve, you said you liked the other guidelines we saw because they were more general, and there we would be more flexible. And that's something I think we should think about. Do we want general guidelines or more specific guidelines? I think that's really the argument, and I think you could argue it either way personally, but maybe just general guidelines since the demand is so far very low and probably will remain so.
If I'm remembering correctly, the more general guidelines were from the Secretary of Interior standards. They had the specific sustainability, their sustainability standards, and there was a section on solar panels in there.
Right.
And they focus, again, on preserving the historic character, minimizing the visual impact, avoiding damage to the historic materials, ensuring reversibility, and retaining and protecting the distinct architectural features like chimneys, dormers, decorative elements. And then there are certain, I believe it was the National Alliance for Preservation of Commissions that suggested case-by-case reviews to assess the visual and structural impact, encouraging educational outreach, recommending alternative placements for ground-mounted in rear yards or in accessory structures. I thought Denver had an interesting point on allowing solar panels. It was a little bit more flexible on accessory structures, I think maybe to address the shading. If maybe the only opportunity you had was on the accessory structure, so I think that would be something to consider as well. And then considering the various types of roofs, pitches, flat roofs. I think that's where Denver's really shines. They have a really nice diagram for all of us visual learners of what do we recommend? How do you meet the 3-foot setback? So definitely some really nice, Denver goes into a little bit more detail. You can pare it back and then have some triggers to say this should come before City Council for case-by-case review.
So I think we maybe have options as far as we could look to formally create a standard that is specific to Longmont. We could loosely adopt one of those, standards as our reference point. Direct staff to, you could just have those various standards at your disposal, and if somebody came in with an application, say, well, this is kind of how it's done in other areas, right? Just as but we're just going to be, it's a case-by-case specific thing. So that feels like maybe 3 different ways to approach it. Maybe there's others, but I'm just trying to throw out some options for commissioners' thoughts on what you think is. I do think this is not necessarily a problem that's in search of a solution at the moment. But 100% agree that getting in front of it's smart. Anybody got any thoughts?
Jennifer, do we have much activity in the area, people coming to you?
I literally have had, in the last 3 years, I've had one person interested in, it was kind of a flush mount product on an accessory building, but they ended up not pursuing it because originally their plan was to use that accessory solar panel to feed into their house, but there was it turned out it wasn't great for that. So they opted not to do that. So literally that's the only time anyone has come to us. So, I think it's really just a matter of, hey, these are things that are, the state encourages. So, there's different tools out there. It's, at least at the state level, we're big into renewable energy sources. But it's just something that it seems that we should at least have something on record that says, hey, we've talked about it, we've thought about this, and we're totally not flying by the seat of our pants when we make recommendations.
Right.
If I can insert something, just FYI, because Harold and I have talked about it with PRPA, the different houses, for example, in both historical sites, and we decided just in conversation that we need solar farms to affect the energy going to homes that can afford that or can't put it on their, just what you talked about. It wasn't a viable option for them. So the city has thought about that so that the whole city has the ability to go renewable energy.
So I'm sorry.
No, that's it. That's all I
The
got.
solar farms would be a way of feeding energy
Yes,
into the current system. You wouldn't have to make any changes in our homes.
exactly.
We would just recognize that the energy that we're getting is.
That at some
form
point, if we get enough energy that we're throwing onto the grid, there will be nothing else but renewable.
Right.
So we're
I
discussing
think that's a great idea, especially since it doesn't cost me anything except.
See,
whatever.
me too. I'm not gonna live long enough to pay that off. So,
Yeah, and Loveland actually has a solar farm as well.
Yes.
Closer as well.
Yeah. The
I'm a
United
little bit
States.
reticent to step into this with any type of advice or guidelines or anything, considering that our demand is so weak. And it's not the kind of thing that we could work on quickly. So if suddenly Jennifer comes in and says, well, forget everything I told you, I've had 10 applications in the last week. Okay, so we get together, we do something, and within a month, we've got either a standard or a recommendation of look at all these various standards or whatever. So we can move quickly, but I just don't see moving on something with, I think your comment, a solution, a problem in search of a solution, or a solution in search of a problem. Solution in search of a problem is what we're talking about here. We don't have any, just,
I agree with that to a point. However, I don't like the optics of scrambling to come up with some rules once somebody does provide an application, right? And so that's where I think you're right, we could come together pretty quickly. I'd rather see us say, even if we say at a minimum standard, the NAPC standard, because it's more flexible and more general, and just formally adopt that as a baseline, right?
Yeah.
And with the understanding that, you know, every situation will be specific, and it might be something where, based on that guideline, staff can say, well, they're proposing on the back side of an accessory building on the back of the lot, I don't even have to take this to HBC, done. But you've got a standard that you can reference, you know, and then if it's more complicated, you could offer, well, this is our base standard, but this is a more complicated scenario, and you might, as an applicant, look at the Denver, you know, standard to see what other jurisdictions have done, and we don't necessarily have, we have to spend, you know, 5 HPC meetings writing another code, but we can have a baseline.
So I could put it as a suggestion, I can include the research that Melanie did with the NAPC standard for the March packet, and have as an agenda item just a brief discussion and say, yep, that looks good, or eh.
That makes sense to me, to where we have, you know, we have a baseline and we have something that, again, it gives staff the ability to, because if you don't have a code, I mean, I do this all the time, right? I'm looking at code and saying, these are the guidelines, this is what I have to do. If I'm not told I have to do this, then I might come up with a really wild idea, and then getting told you can't do it, and then I say, why?
Right.
Well, because we don't like it.
Yeah.
Well, no, you can't do that. You have to actually
Yeah.
refer to something, right? And we don't want to be in that situation.
Yeah, I like the idea of just maybe adopting more general codes rather than going through all the brain damage for something that's all theoretic. But yeah, we should have something up front.
Yeah. I know in other communities, not in Colorado, solar panels have been just like a huge divisive point in historic neighborhoods. And going back to some of our other conversations about what's subjective and what isn't, like, we have visual standards in SOI, but I still feel like it's something that we don't agree on the way we agree on other effects. So it might behoove us as individual commission members to, like, think about what we would mean even by the NAPC standards or something. Like, what would we consider a visual effect? How are we going to deal with that? Because I imagine, like, the houses on the west side that are bigger and taller, and you would have less visual effect. And the houses on the east side are tinier. Are we going to be treating them equally?
You can see all those rooms. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So, I don't know. It doesn't help our discussion today, or we're just going to be arguing about visual standards. But not that I disagree with you. Okay,
No,
we should still.
and I think
adopt
that's the opportunity to have that discussion in the commission where it's public.
Yeah.
You know, if anybody
Yeah.
wants to show up, they can. We don't get any. But
We need to think about
Right.
at a time what we're going to be arguing about.
right, that's fair. It's a great point. And
Okay.
if we want to say, and if the commission wants to add some clarifying language, this is our base standard, but these are 5 points you have to make sure we
Yeah.
I mean,
commit to. Or,
people have to come to us when they're, I don't want to say like talking about windows, but when they've wanted to make additions and things like that, it would be no difference, you know, so.
Yeah,
So yeah,
that's true.
something minimal, but with the understanding of you might need to show us what you want to do
Yeah.
before you do it. So. Cool.
Okay. All right, great. Let's see, so then the next piece was the 150, 250, because I'm not saying that word again. And this was just kind of thrown out there as, you know, is there any appetite for thinking about anything in particular for the city beyond, I mean, typically we've asked council to proclaim May Historic Preservation Month. We get a proclamation, and that's kind of a little, you know, Longmont Leader thing. That's about all we've really ever done.
It sounds like the museum, and you, Melanie, sat in on that meeting. It seems that the museum might be doing some things on this.
Oh, cool.
But we can reach out to them as well.
Yeah, they had a couple of sites that they were interested in that were
Okay.
sort of top of mind. Bedouin? Elizabeth?
Elizabeth
I don't.
Bowden.
Bowden.
Yeah,
Elizabeth
so
Bowden.
we can reach out to Elizabeth and see what they have planned, but it seems like it seems like there's probably some good collaboration there.
What's the city have on its schedule? Nothing?
They could, I don't know about it.
Yeah, I think the Longmont Museum is the city
Yeah.
department that's really kind of been, I don't want to say taking the lead on it, but been running point a bit. So we'll touch base with them and have some additional information at the March meeting.
I know we had talked about inviting the historic preservation.
St. Train Historical Society.
Yeah, they'll be at the
Same.
April meeting.
Could be what?
They'll be at the April meeting.
April, that's kind of
That
close
was,
to.
that was the first time they were able to get there, so.
Well, maybe we should reach out to them and find out if they're doing anything for sesquicentennial.
Well, it's
Sesquicentennial is coming, is right now.
No,
next
it's a
year.
year now.
It's
It's a
a
year
year.
now, okay, so
Yeah,
yeah.
we have
Takes
time.
time to get together.
Yeah, we have time.
And I'm going to speak on Terry's behalf, but I know she was really interested in trying to help out. So if there's ways for us to help, get involved, be bodies for tours, whatever, to have them throw it at us. And I know she was interested.
Okay.
The other thing I would reach to is Colorado Historical Preservation, see what they're doing.
Well, and Damien, I know that was, he did some presentation, he presented at the December meeting on that, so he'll be the person we'll be coordinating with as well.
Okay.
Presumably.
And I think.
The state may be
Okay.
recommending certain things for local communities or doing things,
Well,
and
this
that
is
we
the-
could be in support of that.
This is
So, you know,
the
we're not
History
like-
for All, this is the History for All initiative that History Colorado is doing for the
Yeah.
15250.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we've already done as far as, Canterbury Tower really ties into that as well.
They're trying to get a certain number of properties registered by that time.
Yep, 150.
Was
Whoa.
it
That's a lot.
Imagine, when do they come up with that number?
I know.
I think another thing they brought up that I found was interesting at
But
the
no,
the
statewide.
library meeting was, I think it
Statewide,
sounded like there was
150
potentially some
properties that
funding for
were,
signage
not
if
yet.
we had
Associated
some,
with.
maybe there was some signage on historical buildings or educational signage, so I thought that could be really interesting.
Could LDDA get involved in that as far as,
I hope they would like to.
I think Kimberly wants to,
Mhm.
but
Yeah, and I'm in communication with Kimberly Del Rey.
Nice.
I know that the governor is making this a really big deal. So my political eye tells me that this is gonna be a really big thing in Colorado. Possibly as a way to leapfrog his presidential race. Whatever his reason is, I think he's gonna put a lot of state resources into celebrating us. When we were in Steamboat Springs, they were talking about it. From the staff was talking about what they were doing. So, I think the word is getting out to the various agencies of government to come up with your plan for what's your plan for what you're going to do in celebration of our sesquicentennial. So I think it's an easy boat to ride on. Just have to find out who's steering it right now.
Yep.
There's a state task force that lives at History Colorado. Like everything, I haven't been involved in it, but I can put you or whoever needs to be in touch with the person who is managing that. The task force is comprised of different folks from all over the state, and I think there's some funding for different activities available, but like I said, I've been really outside of that, so I'm not positive what that looks like. But it's super easy to find out. Okay.
And Longmont is an old city. We've already had our sesquicentennial.
Yeah.
So we could get, it might be something that we're looking at doing, but we just don't have money for it. We might be able to link funding from those projects, which is different from this, what we do. Special sesquicentennial grant instead of 20%.
Good at
that would, that we could be supportive of and organize something or do something, especially if it's connected to the 150 project or, this. I don't know how many of those 150 are within Longmont. When Damien made the presentation, he wasn't specific about which ones were in there.
Well, we
We've
definitely,
got at least two.
yeah, we definitely have two.
Yeah,
Right.
we've got the Buddhist temple and the Tower of Compassion.
Okay,
Yeah, I don't think we've got anything else right now.
No, well, I have one thing that's gonna be coming up, so. So yeah, the other thing that's gonna be coming up, and this is, it's on my work plan, is to get the barn, this Latin barn, so the Allen barn, declared declared a local landmark. So, we'll be putting together a package for that, since we have all the research for it. Just a matter of getting it on the agendas and such, and getting everything put together. That is the big goal of that is to be able to get some grant dollars to restore the barn. So that is one that we would definitely be, once we get it landmarked, we'll be putting it forward for state register nomination as well, because of, especially, it would fit into the history for all, given that it is associated with one of the first female homesteaders in the state. So it's also loosely associated with someone with a less savory involvement. Apparently Dickens had some involvement with the Sand Creek Massacre, but it's more Mary Allen's barn than Dickens' barn. And we're gonna go with that.
Isn't there a house on 3rd Avenue that the leader of the Ku Klux Klan lived in?
I wouldn't doubt it, given the 1920s
That would be, I
takeover
don't know.
of the city.
I always say,
Right.
show your bad parts and your good parts,
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
that's
the
history.
Warsaw.
That's
Yeah, it is
educational, more educational too.
Eric would know that.
Locally listed that house over by Central Elementary last year, 2 years ago, that a Jewish family owned, and that
Yeah, the Shea
they
House.
enlarged, when
Right.
like their family was refugees. That would probably, we should send that one to History Colorado. That might
Yeah.
be a good one, because I bet you that's state register eligible.
They should.
Did you say Shea House?
The Shea
Yeah.
House, yes, it's the blue craftsman thing with the pop-up craftsman on top,
Yeah,
on the south side of Thompson Park.
yeah.
I suppose you could call through the cultural resource surveys that we have, just for one more.
Store downstairs.
Yeah.
To see if there's anything particular that pops up that we've been thinking about.
Exactly. And the state register nomination is actually fairly
Plays
easy.
bridge.
Fairly easy.
Is it?
So I've been working on one with the Southern U. I think we could probably,
Well, I think it's already designated.
I could write up any of
Without
these and
so
just
much
cover it.
research. I didn't realize the history of parades in
Yeah.
front of the house. That's impressive.
Okay.
I'm learning so much.
Any other thoughts? This is basically like open season at this point, right? Not on the agenda, other thoughts that commissioners have about things you want to think about in the coming week?
I have a thought that this is a can of worms and it's probably not worth doing, but if we were really ambitious, I was looking at going through this preservation survey plan, on page 70, there's this cluster of designated homes. I'm saying, where is that? It looks like it's Baker Street, I think. Would we want to consider, we have a lot of the research done, would we want to consider enlarging the East Side National Historic District?
Enlarging these.
Yeah. so
Enlarging
it's
it.
locally-
It's relatively small. There's a lot of homes that are intact, going all the way up to the Kitely home on 9th, going all the way down to the cannery, which should be in the historic district, if you ask me, just off of 3rd, and going over to Baker. I mean, if you look at on that little square on the southeast, on the lower right corner of page 70, there's a cluster of homes outside of the national district. They've already been researched. So I don't know how much work that would be to apply for a National Historic designation, but My understanding is
This-
with
oh,
national
right.
designation, there's lots of carrots, not too many sticks. I don't think it'd
Yeah.
be really hard to get buy-in from the neighbors. So, and have a bigger,
On
just-
the priority list as well.
yeah, I think,
Yeah, okay.
so if you, I don't know how much work that would be, but if it would be moderate or less, maybe we should consider that.
I would say it's a higher, one of the higher dollar
We
options
voted
on
to
it.
make both.
It's a high dollar one?
Yeah, it's one of the higher, yeah,
Okay,
higher
let's see,
dollar.
yeah, I don't know.
Well,
So is this just a
but,
thought? Talking about?
but none of these are,
I'm sorry?
You're talking about this? spot
Yeah,
here?
over there.
Okay.
yeah.
You got that whole string of houses up and down there, just east of the historic district, that's just kind of
Yeah.
off the edge of that map, that little insert map. But in addition to that, I mean, you go all the way up Collier, all the way to Kitely, all those houses are intact. You go down, the cannery, I mean, the cannery was the world's largest cannery at one point. Yes,
I read that in your book.
yes, I put it in the book. I read that, I said, really? I mean, no one knows this stuff. If it was part of the district, it would raise the awareness, and I think this is something we should consider doing. But it's my humble opinion. But it's a lot of work, I realize, and I wasn't sure. It's a high dollar item, meaning,
I mean, it was listed as estimated cost to update the National Register nomination for the east side. They were estimating $50,000 for it,
50.
Which, I mean, I don't feel like,
which may not.
I mean,
be-
that's a lot of money. I don't have $50,000 for this, but I feel like this is super easy to get in grants. Like, these are low grant amounts, right? Like, 50's not that much.
And we have a lot of research done.
We can do this.
What's the
Money's
match?
not real.
What's the match?
What's,
Yeah,
what's
it's
25 to
Yeah,
50 would
so
be
it's a 12.
12, yeah.
12 and
12,
change.
yeah.
Okay, it's not like nothing, but again.
Right, but it's
Doable.
doable. It's,
Right.
yeah,
Not a huge
conceivable.
stretch.
So Jen, the Shea House is a city, has the Historic Preservation Commission recommended, and the city is designated as
Right.
Okay.
a local historic landmark. And we're talking about adding this to our requests for state designation. And so that raises a question for me is, what other places are there like that where the city has recognized them as local historic landmarks that we should consider, that we might want to raise up to the state level? I mean, we were really proud on our call when we got
We were.
we
I know.
got 2 designations, and they asked, I made a mistake of getting on the call, so they asked me to say something.
Yeah,
Both days.
Unfortunately, I had a conflict for the
Yeah,
part 2
yeah.
of that.
Thanks, Jen.
It was nice you were there.
Well, Holly and I held the flag, that's okay. But there just might, I think, when you think, well, we're in Longmont, we're not paying attention to this, but they do pay attention to this. And we have a good record, so if we have, 2 or 3, I don't think we should be embarrassed about putting them out there and saying, let's get state designation. If they're worthy, I mean, the city's already said they're worthy of designation. So,
What's
Yeah.
the?
I don't know what kind of
what's the
review
date
process
cutoff?
we have for that.
I mean, what's the,
So there's 3 National Review Board meetings a year.
no, I meant the date of the construction of buildings cutoff. What is the?
Typically 50.
50.
State Register, actually, you can do 30, but,
But 50 is like
Nothing.
We do 50.
yeah, yeah, we
70?
do.
74, 75.
74.
Now 75.
So, I mean, how many, not to go to my own interest, how many 1950s things do we have designated as historic landmarks in town?
Hardly any, they've
No.
all
Right.
been the older ones.
And there's
I mean,
a-
that's
Well,
why
the
like
Shea House was built in 1912.
Brown's Apple
Right.
Farm and
Right.
stuff is on here, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Canada Tower is probably
That's the
the
newest one.
youngest of our
Yeah.
historic
Yeah.
landmarks because it was built in 73.
Yeah.
I guess my question is, yes, what is our process for taking a look at what the city has designated as historic landmarks and reviewing those to see which ones we want to recommend to the state?
I mean, we don't have a formal process per se, it's just a matter of time and capacity. The other thing is, I know for register listing, we would need to get the owner's consent.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
Right, the private home.
Yeah.
Yeah. For both
which
states.
sometimes can be
I'm sorry, get the what?
property owner has to consent.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe that's, maybe looking at our local listings is something that the commission can do, like someone on the commission, and then, you know, I'd be happy if we identified stuff to help write the state register nominations. Those wouldn't be that difficult.
So I'd be glad to volunteer for whatever you need.
Fabulous,
Yeah,
maybe we can send you the
Honestly, it's
website.
looking through the surveys that we already had
Yep.
online and culling through them and saying, hey, I think these 3 are interesting, it
Yeah.
might be worth talking about. So anybody on the commission could take the time on their,
Yeah.
you know, Tuesday evening, firing
Fun.
through some of those
Yeah.
online and reading the cultural resource surveys.
Yeah, that sounds like a fun nerdy project.
Right.
Yeah.
I could do that on Tuesday evening.
All your streaming council sessions.
Yeah,
you can pick up
exactly.
that.
Maybe on your phone. Nobody will notice.
Actually, it's pretty funny because one city I used to work for, some of the council members got in trouble because they were busted playing solitaire during council meetings.
Really?
I
That's
know a
gosh.
couple of those when I first got on. And I mentioned it to somebody in operations, they said, no. I don't want to know that.
Right. Oh, cat videos.
Cat videos.
Might be good though.
Anything else we can get busy with?
Does it sound like our priorities are set?
I think so.
Do we want to recap? All right, let's go through my recap here. Done. So let's see. Recap is we are going to be first and foremost I'll take a look at the council schedule and see when we might be able to get on to do for members of the commission to do a presentation regarding the survey plan and kind of what it means and how we might want to move forward, what it means in terms of grant matches. Prior to that, I will work with Holly to set up some time with Chief Goldman and see if we can identify if there are any sites in this area that might have some particular vulnerabilities from the natural disaster standpoint. So there was that one. Let's see. So we're probably looking at the October 1st grant cycle, potentially identifying multiple surveys once we get finished with, once we identify if there are any particular vulnerabilities that we need to focus on first. And I will be working to make those final little tweaks to the survey plan. Let's see. At the next meeting, we'll be bringing a revised letter for sending to historic property owners. In the meantime, I'll also see if we have any budget for doing those mailings. And then, let's see, here's the other one. Also in March, we'll be bringing the solar panels to discuss. We'll send that out as part of the packet. And so the commission can give a thumbs up, thumbs down on that one. Let's see, continuing to coordinate with Longmont Museum on the 150-250. And take a look at the Shea House. Ongoing coordination. I will say upcoming meetings that we have, March, in addition to the solar standards, Sharice Montgomery is on tap to come and just give an update on the Creek Silo project in that area, just because it's been a while. They're nearing completion of that work on that particular site. And we also have the applicant for the proposed Beaupre Farms, which is also the Nishida farm property, coming because they need to understand what they need to do with regard to those historic farm buildings that the Terry Lake Sewer Project was rerouted to avoid impacting. So I have advised them that yes, in fact, you do need to do a historic preservation plan and see what can be saved. they need to hear that from the commission, obviously. So there might be some certificates of appropriateness. I had a couple of requests that came in late last week that I still need to review. I'm not sure if they rise to commission level or not. I just need to give that once over, and I'll touch base with Chairman Lane to get his professional opinion on that. The April meeting, I have the St. Vrain Historical Society coming to basically just kind of chat and see what they're doing and how we might be able to collaborate on and just ensure we're all on the same page. I also have Tony Jacone lined up to just give an update on the sugar factory efforts as well. So yeah, we're off to a pretty strong start so far.
Yeah,
So-
that's great. Yeah.
And at the same time, we're also, it probably won't be the April meeting, just given that we've already got some meaty agendas, but sometime in Q2, we'll be bringing the Mary Allen Barn to the commission. So we're looking at Q2 for getting that taken care of, for getting that landmark status moving. Did I miss anything?
No, very much.
That's a lot.
Chris?
Yes.
And this is kind of a can of worms question, so be totally willing to just say Suzanne that's not for here. But with like all the concern with housing and transportation stuff you guys are talking about in Vision Longmont, possibly being updated and all that. Where does that kind of stuff fall? Like with people wanting to, put ADUs in and things like that. How?
Sure.
What kinds of effects should we be looking for, thinking about that maybe need to be discussed ahead of time?
So this is where I get to toot Longmont's horn a little bit.
Okay.
All of the state legislation that was passed last year regarding housing affordability, increasing housing capacity, Longmont's already doing like basically 90% of what the state is now requiring most of its communities to do, to the point where they're actually telling other communities in the state of Colorado, and this comes from my contacts at DOLA as well as the governor's office, that they're telling other communities to look at Longmont's codes because we're already doing it. So most of what is now required at the state level for Longmont is basically going to be a recording requirement, a reporting requirement. How do we get it in their format, basically? There are some tweaks to our ADU rules as well. We allow ADUs by right in all of our residential zoning districts. So you can already do them by right. We have some dimensional standards and such, but otherwise,
You can go family detached to it.
yeah, single family detached, so only for single family detached. So obviously, yeah, that which I should probably clarify, although realistically, not a lot of, I don't think there are very many like duplex townhouses where you could realistically do them. But wherever you can do a single family house, you can do an ADU as part of that. So regardless of what many people in the community think, we are ahead of the curve, and we have actually been thinking about a lot of these things. So, they're looking at increasing, how do we ensure that we have density on some of our high frequency transit corridors? All of our mixed use zoning districts permit high density residential as a secondary use. Again, it's just a matter of how we report this to the state. So, and a lot of it's perception. There's a lot of perception. So, one of my many hats that I wear is I do our population estimates and a lot of our data reports, and just looking at a lot of what's being built versus and such. So. I won't editorialize too much. I believe some of the data will be presented at the council retreat in a few weeks. But from our standpoint, ADUs and everything, we do them.
We're good.
We're good to go.
Cool.
And since the governor kind of took away the ability of HOAs to dismiss them, to not allow, he took that away, so you can have
Yep.
ADUs and, yeah.
Good.
Yep.
Good.
So how that would interface here would be only if a property owner who had a landmarked property wanted to
Exactly.
create an ADU.
Yeah.
It just has to
Then
be,
that would have to run
Come
through the
through us.
commission for
Right.
some sort of approval, which, again, all they'd have to approve is that they're meeting the Secretary of Interior standards in terms of the appropriateness, so that there's no formal design guideline other than the interior standards, but those are pretty clear. right,
pretty
about
clear, yeah,
what,
yeah.
you know, and so they would just have to prove that what they're proposing, whether it's, you know, if it's part of, it, you know, it could be an existing accessory building, right? We had one that it was that, you know, shoot,
It's a
that
garage,
block
right?
garage on the
Yeah.
backside. right, on
and
the
that one, they
west
are
side
gonna, they will have to
Fifth and
seek a
Emery.
variance for that because they're converting the garage and our standard is that ADUs cannot exceed 50% of the above grade finished floor area of the property. And that existing garage already exceeds that, so they will have to seek a variance for that as well. So, and simply because it is larger, but it's
Right,
one of
but-
those.
And that came through, and
Yeah.
we didn't like the first design. They blew the whole thing apart, and we said, you can't do this, you've got to be more respectful of the existing fabric and so on, and we made recommendations to them, and they made changes to it, and so on. So that, I mean,
Oh, I'm
this sort of
thinking of,
worked.
I'm thinking of a different property
Okay.
altogether.
Okay.
Yeah, so you're thinking of the one at Fifth and Emery, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that one turned out fantastic,
Yeah.
I have to say. It looks really, really nice. The one I'm thinking of is actually not a landmark, but it is in the
Okay.
historic east side, and they are looking to convert an existing detached garage into an accessory dwelling unit, but it's one of those like 800 and change square
Oh.
foot houses, and the garage exceeds that, so they would need to get a variance. So the state allows us to have dimensional standards, but we can't forbid them outright. And then, as Mayor Peck indicated, one of the other bills basically says HOAs can't prohibit them outside of any dimensional standards. I know in my particular neighborhood, the HOA president was kind of having a lot of consternation, shall we say, about that with the elected official who lives in our neighborhood. And realistically, looking at the lots in the neighborhood, I don't think it's cause for concern because just in my neighborhood, at least, it wouldn't be a cause for concern just because it's not really physically possible to site a detached ADU on some of the lots. So we can do dimensional standards as far as, minimum setbacks and such, but you can't prevent them outright.
That was it, that was
Cool.
checking in.
No, that's
Top of mind.
That's
Yeah.
an easy one.
That's all right. I knew we had stuff happening with that. I was like, okay, I don't know, but I'm clear on how that all works, so.
But yeah, there are a lot of discussions in the community about density and such, so.
Well,
And
yeah,
that's where I'll just smile and nod.
there you go, yeah, cool.
Before you
Call
adjourn,
the day?
I do,
Okay,
but it wasn't really on the agenda.
yeah,
That's other items.
that's where
Yeah.
we're at.
So the council, because we are having more people, younger people who want to be on council, and like now we have 4 people who work, we are discussing the role of the liaisons to the boards and commissions. Are they needed? Because it is a council decision, it's not in the charter or anything. So I'm asking this commission, do you want a council liaison here? What is the role that you want? If you want them, does it matter? Are you good without? As we gather the information and the council decides how they want to go with the certain boards and commissions. Some people, like in GLA and the senior center and the library, they want council there. But what is our role? Do you want us just to sit and listen? Do you want a council update? Do you care at all?
Yes, we care
So,
about it.
just informal.
I think it's been very helpful, first, my experience at least, first with Aaron and then with you, to have somebody that it's not necessarily is going to jump into every conversation, but if necessary, we could turn to, and they wouldn't be ignorant of what we were doing. And I think, especially when things come on appeal to the council, I think, not just from our commission, but any time something comes from a commission or a department to the council, I think the first eye is going to be to the liaison. And they're going to say, well, look, we can go and read a year of minutes, or you can just tell us what is this involved and what did you think of it while you were watching it? And I think that's, whether it goes on in a study session or wherever, I think the liaison is a very valuable addition to the discussions. So I would be very concerned if the liaison were eliminated. I think that would just be bad for Longmont.
Okay. Agreed.
I find it very helpful to have you here, or someone from council here, at times, certainly, when we need some input from how would the city deal with this. I'm curious what it's like for you. Do you go back to the council? Do you feel like you're the expert on historic issues if it comes up? Do you use that very much on the council side? Because it does take a significant amount of your time, I realize, and yes, we're all busy. I find it helpful for you to be here, but again, only so often. Do you use it on the other side?
So to your question, it's why I established the pre-sessions, because inside of the Sunshine Law, no more than two council people can meet, and that really isn't helpful at all. So the way that opens, that pre-session, is everybody goes around and gives an update on their boards and commissions. Because I feel that, for example, I stepped in for a council person who couldn't go to the senior center, and it was all about, we need more space, we need more, we're running out. And I thought, I've never heard this.
Yeah.
I didn't know when we do the budget, why aren't you coming to us?
Yeah.
So from that perspective, that liaison never told us anything, so that's what the pre-sessions are all about. Let's all figure out what's happening on our boards and commissions, and from a policy standpoint, can we help out? So now, the other question for you is, does that liaison have to be there every month? Can they go quarterly? Is that, or just when you ask? I don't know.
I think it's, having been responsible for attending things and watching and observing and reporting back to clients, the continuity of being at every meeting is important.
Okay.
It's just a question of understanding the flow of the commission discussions and how they work, and sometimes they're quiet about things and sometimes they're very concerned about things. I don't think you get that if you're like more of an observer on a quarterly basis. I think if you're there for every meeting, then you understand the flow as it's happening. And the minute, if you miss one and then for some reason you have to miss another, suddenly you go, could be 3 months or 2 quarters of not being at meetings. So I think if you're going to do it, you do it right.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Could we think about it as agenda-based? Like, I think it was last month, we had a 8-minute meeting.
That's
Right. It kind of felt like a waste of your time to have you
If you know it's
sitting
going to
there
be
for
an
8
8-minute
minutes.
meeting,
Right.
call me, and I don't have to.
Well, yeah, that's a whole different discussion, right?
Yeah, we're not going there.
But yeah, no, maybe we could, because I also understand how taxing it can be to have to go to everything. And I don't think you're wrong, but I also think people have a lot of different, I think you're right, but I think people have a lot of different things in their life pulling them in different directions. You have to decide, well, am I going to the kids' recital today, or am I going to the commission meeting, or am I getting this other thing done that is also required for work or whatever? And I think if people felt like they had some flexibility, then maybe it'd be easier to make some of those decisions.
Okay.
So, but I don't know what that answer is.
Yeah, and I have sort of a similar perspective than Commissioner Warren. Because, for example, this meeting is very helpful for you to be here, because we can say, okay, well, what about this, and get feedback directly, and change the course of action would have been different if we didn't have a council person here. Right. You're able to give us enough information to make a better decision about how we move forward as commission. So that's really important. I think in the situations where there is something that might go to appeal, and you're going to end up hearing it, to have heard all of that discussion firsthand is really important. There are occasionally a meeting where we look at a particular certificate of appropriateness for something, and it's all kind of technical jargony stuff, and it's not controversial when you don't have a bunch of people coming in here. And maybe that's not one you really need to be there for.
Yeah.
But to be on a fixed quarterly schedule, you have no chance that that's going to align perfectly.
Right.
So that makes it hard to say.
Okay.
I mean, you either cherry pick or you do it all. But I think you can't do it quarterly randomly, because I don't think that ends up being effective.
And it is my understanding that when it does go to appeal back to council, then that liaison can't vote. Because,
But they can still,
Really?
you can still
Really?
discuss it.
Deliberate.
You can still discuss it in the study sessions.
because,
Oh, it's quasi judicial as opposed to legislative, is that?
yeah, I think so, and I would have to check on this commission specifically. But I know in planning and zoning, we cannot. I mean,
And I think that's the
Yes.
case here, because this is a decision-making.
Yes.
Yeah.
that involves legal and money.
Yeah, and that was gonna be my thought, is that I think it's dependent on whether or not it's an advisory board or if it's a decision-making board.
Exactly.
And we're a decision.
Decision making.
So if you can't vote, do you have the opportunity to tell your perspective? Because if you have to be silent, then it's almost worse.
Well, then, but then in a pre-session, when we talk about the boards and commissions we're on, what's being discussed, et cetera. But no, it would be biased. I mean, it would be assumed biased even if you weren't.
Yeah.
And for the petitioner, that just would be a bad look.
Wow, that's a can of worms I never thought about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense, I guess, yeah.
Do you rotate, how do you select the boards? How are the liaisons selected?
Once a year, all the boards and commissions are listed in that, and that is also the ones that are outside of the city, like NADA, Dr. Cog, Community Solutions, et cetera. People pick their priorities, their first 5 priorities, and then if 2 or 3 people pick the same one, they get to decide among themselves. Yeah, I'll do this if you'll do that, or,
But they change every year, who the
Yes.
liaison is.
or not. If there's like how long has Steve been here? No. It depends if
His
the
chair's
board
gonna get
commissioner- The stamp is better. If a board of commission really likes that person and it's a good reputation, then yeah. Or if they didn't show up at any meetings at all last year, then you say, which has happened, which is why I've been pulled in on others this year. And that's because they're younger and they have jobs and don't get home until 6 or 7. But we do want younger people who, the world's changing, their perspective is needed. I don't want to run the world the way I want to run.
If they knew how to work, they could run for Congress.
They wouldn't make as much money. So anyway, thank you for your input. This is a yes. Okay.
Okay.
Continue.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Any other commissioners have a comment or something to throw out?
I have another.
Okay.
I was just thinking, at the Sesquin.
150,
As we were going through these houses and the different, especially the Shea House, I knew nothing about that. Would it be interesting to have the brew hop trolley, if you pick specific houses, give a historic tour with the handouts? Because
That would be cool.
wouldn't that be fun?
I want to do that.
That would be cool.
Can they still make stop it?
Well, that's a whole lot.
That's a point.
It is.
That would be really fun, and that would be something like like actionable that we could get?
I love that.
I like that.
Yeah.
Or get the gentleman that presented at the Historic Preservation on historic cocktails. I thought that was really
Oh, did you go to that? That could be a good last stop.
I went to some much more boring technical things.
I knew you had it covered.
Wasn't that like it was the happy hour?
Yeah, it followed on cocktails right after.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
it's
just, yeah, it's hilarious.
pretty fun stuff.
I went to the historic storefront thing instead of the
Main
cocktail
Street?
thing. Yeah,
Oh,
that was
yeah.
pretty cool. That was
I was just,
made me rethink stuff on our street. But anyways,
I just realized when I was looking at the program that two people I worked with in Jacksonville were like keynote speakers and organizers, so I was on like the First Coast, the Jacksonville section APA board with NSN. Adrian Burke was the executive director of Riverside Avenue
Joan, I
Restoration
just
when I was
want
at
to make sure I heard
the
right. You were
Yeah, I was like, oh, I'm going, I know people.
talking about some kind of
This
a
is super
historic
self-centered,
trolley?
but I wish
Tour.
we could just bring it back
Tour.
to Denver.
Of whatever places that this commission chose to be
I'm always happy for
historic.
And I
a new
just
trip,
wonder
yeah.
if anybody's ever done this, get a grant for a trolley to go around historic sites?
Not that I know of, not in my time
We could be
here.
the first.
It'll be great.
Yeah.
You know, get a grant for a trolley that, you
Well,
know,
we have the trolley,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
brew hop trolley.
Yeah, we'd just be paying them for their day.
so we
Yeah.
just
Right.
need a grant for, paying them for their day, whatever that would cost. So,
We got
yeah,
someone who could
can we
lead
look
it.
into that?
Elizabeth Bowden.
That to me seems like a really good, like, collaboration with the Historical Society and the museum.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be so
Yeah.
fun.
I'm all about
Yeah.
possibly as well, that could be interesting.
Yeah.
That seems like a good collaboration exercise.
Yeah.
You wouldn't
No
wear
one
people out on your
is
3-hour
shovering
tour.
That's right, I
or-
wouldn't
Mhm.
shoot.
No, I know that we have people that come visit us from out of state. That would be a great thing to pop, you know, usually you get in a car and you try to point out what's going on, but getting on a trolley and, you know, bouncing around town for an hour, that would be great.
Fires,
Yeah.
all the fires.
Some place in every
And the
part
fire
of
chief
town.
takes
Yeah.
people through and talks about.
Maybe a pamphlet explaining
Because it was,
The
because it
original-
was coal, so
landowners.
apparently
Yeah.
most of Lafayette
That
was
would be
burned
really
at
fun.
different points, so,
I
yeah.
mean, that can't be done tomorrow, but
Yeah, but you're-
Well, and there was
Yeah.
coal covering, there was coal.
And it could be part of, it could
So I
be
guess
part
that's
of
just
our
what happened.
session.
It took like almost nothing, so yeah, so
Celebration.
the fire chief just goes through, goes down.
Announcement of historic trolley.
Used to be here, it used to be there.
And tells gruesome stories of
Not that
people
I
who died.
expected you
and
to
all
put
that.
in
Yeah,
150,
it's
250
kinda
grants,
funny.
but I'll get you
I kinda wanna
Caitlin.
take
I think
that.
Caitlin is our contact
Okay.
district.
I had no idea it was a
Okay.
And then you
So
can
that was-
pass
Oh,
those
yeah.
on.
And I've lived in
Okay.
Boulder, and I
Yeah,
had no
bounce
idea.
off her.
Okay.
I know.
Anything else? And if not, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Look at me.
Yeah.
Second. All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much for your time.